Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how to drive change and break the status quo in B2B organizations for 2025 and beyond. We're going to give everyone 1 to 2 more minutes to join before we begin. As a few housekeeping notes, this session is recorded, so everyone registered and attending will receive a copy of the recording within the next few days. We won't have the ability to do Q&A at the end of the session, but please feel free to submit your questions in the question panel on the side, and our team of experts will be more than happy to follow up with you after the webinar. Okay, so I think we are at a good time to get started. Welcome again, everyone, to today's session on making the business case for change and how to break the status quo plaguing many traditional B2B organizations. This session is going to be a fireside chat based on a white paper that we recently published on the same topic. There's a QR code to download it right here. It is a practical guide to help digital leaders and champions for change navigate and succeed in B2B digital transformation. Of course, what we're going to present and talk about today is just the tip of the iceberg of what we cover in these meaty 40 pages. So if you like what you hear, you know where to go to get even more of that. And at the end, we'll show you the QR code again. My name is Julia Rapkin. I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager for B2B at commercetools, and I'm really honored to be joined today by our subject matter expert, one of my co-authors on this white paper, and my good friend, Martin Schneider from 10ops. Martin, thank you so much for being with us here today. Could you please introduce yourself and share a bit of your background with us?
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Hi. Yeah, Martin Schneider, as you probably can tell by the accent in a few minutes, I'm from Germany. Yeah, my background is marketing and business management. I worked for Philips Lighting, now called Signify, for many years. Started then as an entrepreneur and supporting startups, SMEs, and corporates. But I'm kind of like stuck with, let's say, in the B2B world and corporates. That's really what my heart beats for. And then I also supported Mitsubishi Chemical Group for many years, and also got to know them, my co-founder of 10ops. So together with Tim Bourage, we founded 10ops, the opportunity company. And as you can already tell, it's focusing on our business opportunities. So we are serving international corporates that are on the stock market to really look into how can they improve their share value, what are the growth pockets they should step into, and also how to focus on really the most promising opportunities. But I think we're also going to touch upon some of these topics in more detail later anyways.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Martin. I'm actually really happy that we were able to collaborate on this one together. So let's maybe set some context first. Why is change such a strategic imperative for B2B organizations? I think for all of us that are not living under a rock, everyone would agree that the world is changing very rapidly, almost day by day in every aspect. And this is affecting all businesses, but especially many traditional B2B organizations. Technology is advancing, buyer expectations are evolving, and all of this amid a push to demonstrate value and ROI in a much shorter time frame. It's almost like what Charles Darwin said in the 1800s in his theory of evolution, that we must adapt or perish. Which makes business adaptability a critical element for business survival. And yet, here we are. So, Martin, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think there are multiple aspects, right? One a very obvious one that you're living in a very fast-paced B2C environment, right? And you don't want to travel back in time when you go to work. You have certain things where you're like, wait, can it not be done easier and whatever? So I think transformation is for a lot of people something that they feel it needs to happen anyways, because they think there's so much more potential. But one of the most critical parts, and that's what we see with a lot of organizations, is especially if you look also into the pace of change, also with AI and so on, it leaves a lot of space for disruptors in industries, especially if you're in hardcore manufacturing, where business as usual, it runs very smoothly over decades. Now it opens really the space for disruptive business models. So, and if you then look into the time you need to change to actually adjust, it's quite a lot. So I think what I'm trying to get at is change is often seen as a burden. It's often seen as transformation. It's linked to legacy system. But in the end, it's not only something that needs to be done. in order to stay competitive. But also, it comes with a lot of opportunities. That if you open the door for change and you actually foster that, that can open a lot of doors to really capture additional opportunities in the market.
Yeah, I think the status quo is becoming increasingly unsustainable for many B2B organizations, and they don't really know how to get out of it. But change is still very much a really scary thing. So I think that's where we come in, right? So it seems like a no-brainer that something has to change, but many organizations are still super resistant to any kind of change. And one of the things we actually broke down in the white paper, which I got very click happy about and already shared on the screen. But one of the things we actually broke down in the white paper were some of the common barriers to change. Could you take us through what those are, Martin, and how they actually manifest in digital transformation?
Yeah, so as already briefly indicated, the transformation is seen as a burden. So it's typically something that it's there is a certain resistance because it also has a risk that it goes wrong, right? The transformation comes with, okay, why should we transform? So you always need to prove to an organization why you actually change. Actually, you should be justifying why you keep status quo, especially in a world that changes so quickly, markets that change so quickly, new business models that come up. You should actually turn it around. But for many organizations, there's a very high fear of change. It could also be successful. It could also disrupt how your business runs. And some people are just not happy with change. And on the other hand, of course, it could go wrong. And especially if you are the person driving change, that also means at least that people at least have the perception that their job is at the line, right? So I think that also is quite a risk. And you need to also have a culture that allows for change, that allows, no matter what department you are in, that you can basically drive change and innovate. And often this is not a given. The other one is financial and investment challenges. So of course, sunken cost fallacy. I think we could write another white paper just about that one. But then also the budgeting part. Who owns it? If you run an initiative, and especially what I see happening a lot, initiatives that are somewhere stuck between marketing, sales, and it's founded by IT. So then marketing initiates it, sales drives you and gets the benefits, and IT pays for it. Then at some point, someone is not getting the return on investment. And especially with very new initiatives, organizations do not know who the owner is. And then also they sometimes say, let's have multiple owners. That's also not a good one. But so I think that change structurally, not only from an organization, but also in terms of financial setup, budget, who owns it, what's the strategy, who runs the project, who hands it over later to the organization, how you go into an operational model. All this is for many organizations a huge problem. They don't know how to handle it. They're running into a lot of barriers, and that consequently comes with pushback in the organization, especially from C-level.
Yeah, and I think what was most interesting to me is that, the longer you wait to actually make any of that change happen, the higher the threshold for change becomes. So the longer the delay, the worse it gets. And I actually saw a statistic recently that something like 70% of Fortune 500 companies are still running on software that was written over 2 decades ago, which seems kind of crazy, right? Like we were like 15 years old back then. I think I had a flip phone. That was the heyday of the BlackBerry. And I think we can all agree that the world has really changed. But these businesses and a lot of their processes and technology has not really kept up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think Martin, you've said it best when you said that the status quo is never really questioned the same way that a new initiative is questioned, right?
Yeah, exactly. That is we see that happening a lot. So I mean, especially if you work with large organizations, right? You have someone who needs to commit to the project. There's someone basically said, I sponsor it or I initiate it, and then you also have teams that need to execute it. And it is the rounds you basically do to get an approval for a program or whatever. They can be very time and intensive because you always need to justify why you want to change. If you start calculating the opportunity cost of some processes you have in your organization, very typical example, shipping samples. it is actually sometimes engineers or senior product managers in organizations that actually ship boxes to make sure that their samples get to customers because there's no process. If you calculate alone the FTE costs of the people doing something that is sure not in their job description, right? That would already justify the cost for a small pilot. And I think in that combination, also organizations often go for these so-called boil the ocean projects. So, it needs to be a program, it needs to be this, we need to see who's the owner, then we set it up for the next 3-4 years. And while actually setting up a program, you're already 6 months down the road. And you haven't proven anything, and you have created a huge opportunity cost for just exploring. So that is something that is in a lot of organizations, that's just their nature, and changing that is not an easy one.
Yeah, so I'm actually glad that you brought this up, because I think most of the folks that are joining us here today are probably what you and I would call the change champions within their organization. So they're seeing the same things we are. They're agitating for change to happen, but obviously it's hard, and not everyone kind of maybe has the same experiences that you do. So in our white paper, we definitely cover a lot of tactical strategies for how to question the status quo. But in our limited time here, I wanted us to actually dive into a few of them. So the first step is always figuring out, what are your organization's specific barriers to change? So basically, how high is that initial mountain that you need to climb? But once you know that, what's next?
Yeah, so strategic alignment, of course, it's always easier if your change or whatever program you want to pursue or what change you want to initiate is actually somewhere linked to an overall agenda of the strategy, right? So you could, of course, say, I want to change the world tomorrow, but you need to see, is there anyone in the organization? Are there programs that I can actually work together with others to say, the head of sales, they are looking into this and this cost saving program, or they want to do a different go-to-market or whatever, that fits actually also with what I'm trying to do. So, and then actually to team up and to see, let's make it a joint program, or it fits into the overall strategic, let's say, way of working or the overall strategy that they have. And it seems like a super easy one, but many people don't do this. They work in their silos, they do a strategy for a department, and they don't align it with goals of others. So that is also something where that is a super important one. And of course, you need to also look into the market shifts. So, and what are customer expectations? What we also see a lot is you of course know Schrödinger's cat, right? Many people never open that box. they would just, let's keep that box, and I don't want to know anything about the cat. So the thing is, it's super important to understand what's the status, is this really a market need, have discovery meetings with customers, have a conversation before you start a project. Also internally, if you go to management and you say, we've spoken to customers, we have 2 potential customers that would actually buy this. It's a complete different conversation from we believe, and I talked to Eric down in that office and to Sam down there, and they agree. It's a nice one. It might be sophisticated enough depending on what it is, but often it's not enough of a proof, right? So I think the combination of internal alignment from a strategy, but also having external evidence is super important. That brings us also to customer centricity. I know everybody wants to be focusing on the customer first, but often it's organization and process first, to be honest. So that is really to really build around the customer, but not only coming from, you are the customers, this is our offering, so these ones should be good for you. But to go, okay, what is my customer's issue? What is happening in my customer's market? Who are the competitors? What's going on? And how can I solve a problem for them, right? To also create a bit of a pull rather than just a push. So that is really looking into customer centricity and building it around your customer. Of course, there's the other extreme, which I would give a very good warning here, is my customer wants. I think that's something we always see, especially with account managers that take their job very serious, which is good. But I think especially if you're a huge multinational corporate, you need to also make sure that you create a case that we have voices here from DACH region, we have voices here from Asia. I think we really need to develop the product. It should not be too extensive of an exercise, but don't rely on single customer feedback. If they're not if they're not willing to pick up the entire bill for the developments, then you should build a bit of a stronger case. That's my point. Yeah, brand and purpose. This is one where I always have a bit mixed feeling with that one. It's on one hand, it's super important to be in line with what you want to do, but it's also good now and then to allow for a little bit of a breakout, right? Because I see this also. We had also one project back then where we wanted to at Philips to talk about really new ideas at Philips Lighting, right? What we do also in the lighting business and so on. And it was really about brainstorming. And I remember that, I mean, it's many years back, but when one of the ladies in our team said, yeah, we're not going to do this. We are a lighting company. 6 years later, they did exactly the same thing that we discussed that day. So you know what I mean? So I think it's good to know where you come from and what fits to your brand and also with your organization. But it's also nice sometimes, especially nowadays, to break out and have a bit of to look also what's on the other side, right? Yeah, efficiency and agility. That is something that gets more and more important. Again, talking about discussions about should we get another system? How should we change all of it? Whatever. I think flexibility nowadays is super key. Going for a modular approach, going in best case even for a headless approach is the best you can do, because it helps you to play around. What I saw happening in a lot of corporates is you have an idea and everybody is like, okay, that's also a good case. We should be doing this. But if you do this, then this has to do with this project. If this project, and for example, you're talking about a customer portal, or the customer portal with online ordering, it reduces the cost of serving tremendously. You have a business case. It's very clear. Oh yeah, but there is a front end, and the front end is linked to a web page program. And there is product information, which is linked to a PIM. And then you start opening a huge box, where if you have a very modular approach, you can say, you know what, it's all API driven. Let's launch it anyways. And when the PIM is ready, and we actually did that in one project, we said we first source from the ERP, and when the PIM is ready, we plug in the PIM, and the other part is ready. If you say you want to do a different front end, when it's ready, we plug it in and we plant it into the roadmap. And that is something that keeps you very agile, because super often it's underestimated what the opportunity costs are. If you have an opportunity that saves you, let's say, 400K, 500K a year, but just by reducing the cost of serving, any year you don't do this, you need to think about that. You could already pay off that project theoretically, right? And one more thing, and then maybe also touch upon this later, but often the inefficiencies are on a burden for individual people. For an account manager who needs to send data sheets, for an engineer who needs to send packages, right? And that is something where you have people that are not focusing on their job, doing where they add value, because your organization is not efficient enough. And that is something that is also often not measured and not looked at. But if you want to build a case for change, I think that is a very, very good starting point.
And these four key areas that you just went through and that we see on the screen, together they form what we call a value audit. So a value audit is a structured way of asking the right questions about your business and answering them honestly and getting a lot of your stakeholders on board. So what are our end goals? What are the problems we're actually trying to solve? How are we going to measure our success? And are our current technologies and processes holding us back or accelerating us forward? So I think starting with a value audit really helps set the stage for everything else that you're going to do. And I love that, once you have all of these value streams laid out honestly, it's also really great to pressure test them with other teams and stakeholders. So this could uncover misalignment. One of the things that you touched on, Martin, and I'm actually going to jump to the next slide because this is exactly what you started talking about is, this is where you can start having those conversations around wasted resources that don't serve the end goals, as well as mapping mapping, what are the customers' journeys to where real value is being created or lost. So one of the other strategies that we cover in the white paper for questioning the status quo, and it's one of my favorites because I'm a numbers girl, it's calculating the cost of stagnation versus the cost of opportunity. So Martin, could you tell us a little bit more about what is the cost of stagnation versus what is the cost of opportunity?
Yeah, so you basically have the opportunity cost where you calculate if you would be doing something else, right? But on the other hand, also the cost of stagnation. Let's imagine a very practical example. There are certain business opportunities, right? And again, about business opportunities, as mentioned earlier, you always need to see, are there really business opportunities or are they just a dream? And there is no evidence. It's like the cat in the box, right? And that at the point where you say, okay, we now see there's a business potential, or it's also risk mitigation, that there is quite some cost involved if you don't even explore this, right? Of course, if you, let's say there is, you want to step into e-commerce, especially B2B manufacturing, this is something that's very often super underestimated. Yeah, well, people don't want it. It's still a traditional industry. You could also be the disruptor in the market, but that's a different topic. But then actually not doing it, that exposes a huge risk for the organization. Not only the cost of stagnation, of not actually moving forward, meaning that if the market changes rapidly, you cannot adjust in time, but it also means that you're losing out of a lot of potential business. I had once that quote from an author. He basically said, when I write a book, the time it's published, it's outdated. So, and that is, I think, the same that's true also for these kind of things. The moment you realize that your competition is more agile, has reduced their basically the cost base, or a disruptor enters the market where the chances today, in especially traditional markets, are super high, you're too late to the party. And if you don't also have an infrastructure where you then say, let's now change the ERP system, let's now change, and instead of focusing, okay, for example, I create modular, let's say a web shop that works with an interface. We do credit card payment. Let's first solve this and we later solve the ERP system problem. Then you can already try to react to it, but still you are reactive, you're not proactive, right? So there is quite, not only cost of stagnation, but there's also risk of stagnation that should not be underestimated. And of course, opportunity costs, that is often also linked to something that you can easily measure or something that is known. But I would always advise to look at both of them and define what if scenarios. What if this and this happens? And also, what if it works? And then there are certain things you can also not unsee, even as management, to see, okay, they might have a point with that one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is a really compelling way to frame the business case for change, especially for executives that are focused on the bottom line, which many executives today are. It's not just about what you're spending, but also what you're losing out on. And before we actually dive into detail on how to build a business case, I want to touch on one last strategy, but which seems kind of simple, but I think a lot of the time can actually be very overlooked. And this is the value of a simple conversation in building consensus. No one change champion can scale the mountain in a silo. And it's super important to get buy-in and support from these partners in crime across the organization, which would add power to the vision and execution of the changes.
Yeah, so I think what is important here, there are two momentums where this is super critical to actually get buy-in of organization. I mean, that's always something people say, oh, you need to get buy-in of the organization, but the moment you start a project or you want to start a project and you go to management to pitch it, there will be questions. There will be a lot of questions, right? So how I like to look at it is you have an MVP, which is something that is very well known, but also to have an MVT. Let's take again the example of a web shop. So I have a minimum viable team. That means I have someone who's involved from logistics, I have someone who's involved from financial. You can still go for a proof of concept and say, we created now something very slim to test it, to do a proof of concept, but we discussed already what the next steps are. For example, you now have credit card payment, but we also should allow for our bigger customers that they can purchase on their PO, but that needs a connection to the ERP and so on. These are further steps you only do as an investment when you have the proof of concept. The important thing is you listen to them, you take their concerns, and you actually include them into your design. Maybe not even in the MVP stage, but after that. So that means you basically, every department has been heard. Now you go to management, and management says, yeah, what's with this? What's with this? And typically, of course, the management people are representing all the departments below that you already work with. So you work with people from their team that already confirmed this needs to be done, this is okay, and you had already your sanity check. That is something that working for 10 years now in that sector, that's something that I would really say that this is a very warm recommendation to do this. And the other one is, again, what if you're successful? You need to be able to scale. And what I also see often is that people in silos create their little projects and then they're successful and they're like, oh, now I need to scale it. Oh, I need to talk to these departments. And then they say, why was I not involved? Why is that not on our radar? We have no resource allocated because we didn't know about this project. So that means then you're having the pushback. You need to have these conversations either way. And the difference is, are you the driver or are you just running into a confrontation? And I would highly recommend to be the driver of the conversations. So an MPT is something I would always go in combination with the MVP. I know there's going to be some unpleasant conversation, but you will be surprised that if you go and have these conversations, how many doors that open also in terms of ambassadors.
Yeah, and of course, it's always more fun doing things in a team. So this leads us perfectly into the framework for actually building a strong business case. So we've broken it down into 5 crucial pillars to include and consider. People, processes, customers, costs, and technology. So since we were just talking about the value of a conversation, I'll take on people and then we can switch off. But people are foundational to any change or transformation exercise. People need to have the right mindset to embrace change. The change champion needs to help foster that mindset. This means communicating a clear vision, constantly using storytelling and data, and showing how it connects to everyone's day-to-day work. It also means getting the C-level on board, which we're going to talk about in just a few moments, but also leveraging this top leadership to create a culture of experimentation that allows teams to fail fast and learn fast without fear. Because as you said, right, the fear of success can sometimes be even bigger than the fear of failure. So Martin, can you tell us a little bit more about the second pillar, processes, really briefly?
Yeah, so for processes, I think it's again to set up for an MVP, for example, a very clear process that is dedicated for an MVP, and then later to have one for scaling and integrating to really business as usual, right? I think that is also something where you should also challenge existing processes, but this is essential for if there's no process, there's no buy-in. That's simply how I would look at it. No.
Yeah. Our third pillar is customers. And the only reason why it's third and not first is so that it could be in the center of this slide. So obviously we spoke a little bit about customer centricity already, but every decision that's being made should revolve around customer needs and wants. So this is going to include doing a lot of qualitative research, leveraging behavioral data, leveraging the sales team, running co-creation workshops with customers, maybe beta testing new experiences, and taking advantage of customer advisory boards or whatever you have at your disposal, because obviously understanding your customers and their journey is paramount to business success, no matter whether you're pursuing change or not. Martin, take it away with cost.
Yeah, as I already said, that balancing investment and long-term value, I think sometimes you also need to make sure that you not only look always at return on investment, because otherwise your organization is not going to move forward. Because you also need to, if you have the engine 1, you also need to prepare for engine 2. So what is coming in the next days? So that also means you also need to look into revenue to be generated with offerings that we don't even have yet. And that's sometimes very difficult because also the reimbursement system with account management does not always work in your favor. But that is something where you need to find a smart way for your organization to to balance the costs and also be willing to do proof of concept at a little cost and with a little return, at least to prove a point for future investments that you want to do. Because otherwise you invest, you do boil the ocean projects, and then you're not going to get the return on investment that you expect.
You're also not going to get the buy-in. So I definitely want to dive a little bit deeper into this financial decision maker topic with you, but we're going to do that in just a few slides. But before that, I'm going to close out the fifth pillar of a strong business case, which is technology. And obviously, technology should be an enabler for all of the other pillars, not an inhibitor. And so it's important to evaluate technology in light of your business goals. So looking at technology and the landscape more broadly, we're definitely very much in the age of composable. And I think the age of AI is rapidly approaching. And this is where it truly begins to matter whether your technology is cloud native, whether your technology is flexible enough, whether your technology is interoperable with different data sources, as those are going to be critical determining factors for innovation, for scalability, for success. And essentially that wraps up the 5 pillars that form the base for a successful business case, which is obviously only, part of the overall process. So Martin, as someone that has done this multiple times, once you have your pillars and once you have a clear strategy, how do you actually go about proving value and proving that your plan will work?
Yeah, so we are a huge fan of proof of concept. I personally love it because it's actually, yeah, again, I've been in too many boil the ocean projects to know that this is not the way to success. So creating a proof of concept is super important. Running a pilot project, and super important, have a realistic proof of concept. Sometimes it's about I want to test the technology, one of the 5 pillars, or I want to test with a customer, or I want to test the process. And it's not about we're going to generate 20K turnover in the first 4 weeks. Be realistic. What do you need to test? Right? If you haven't plugged in marketing, don't even start with sales, because in the end, you need to be very clear what you want to test. Start experimenting, because if the proof of concept is not first time right, give it some time to adjust, to fine tune, because it's something new. You might need to change the focus a little bit, but that is something where the entrepreneurial mindset is super important. Try to make it work, not at all costs, but sometimes shifting it a little bit right or left, or changing a little bit the outcome that you expect that can already help. And then also that can actually also really go into the ideation phase. The soon you open that box of let's experiment, let's get some results. Hey, this customer thought about actually they ask us about if we also have tooling for the shop. What if? And then you start really exploring, and then you start building. And that is a pure entrepreneurial approach to test it, build it further out, make it mature, and then scale it.
Well, from all the POCs and MVPs and MVTs that you've been involved in, what would be your advice to other business leaders making their case for change? Like, what should they prioritize?
From these 3, or you mean in general?
Within kind of a proof of concept, what kinds of proof of concepts should be prioritized?
I think that if we look at as maybe a bit of a guidance, the 5 pillars we had earlier, I think customer and people is the most important. Because you need, processes you can always discuss. It's something that needs to fall in place when you have something that you want to drive further. But getting the people on board at an early stage, having these unpleasant conversations, maybe even at the beginning, get people on board, listen to them, try to find a solution. And then the second one is find a customer who's paying for it. If you don't have a customer, why you should be doing this? You're still running a business, right? So, and if sometimes it's also, we could think about it. That could be joint go-to-market. That could be this and that. But these 2 pillars are super essential. Without these 2, I'm pretty sure that your proof of concept will not succeed. No.
I love that advice. And now we can actually finally get to the question that I have been hinting at and dying to ask, or dying to dive into the whole time. So we can all acknowledge that the economic climate nowadays has been pretty rough over the last year or so. Senior leaders across all organizations are not only wary of making new investments, but they also expect ROI. But I'd love to zoom in on one of these critical senior leaders to convince the CFO. So obviously, you would want to tailor your business case to each executive that you're speaking with. But what would be your strategy for selling the business case to the CFO specifically?
Yeah, the thing is that these bigger projects are very difficult to justify because if you say, if we do this and that, then we're gonna have a return in 2 years' time, and that's gonna be amazing. Yeah, okay, not a good case. So how I like to look at it is to have really, by all means, milestones, but to say, let's start with a proof of concept, then we actually launch it in a small scale, then we do this and that, and along the way, you have KPIs for every step in between. So that also means it's similar going to an investor to invest in your startup and say, don't give me all the money at once, but we're going to do that milestone based. The CFO doesn't work very different. They work the same way. So if you say, look, we're going to have here some KPIs, and they can sometimes be a little bit off because in the end it's something new, but you also need to maybe adjust the KPIs and look at it. But I think you need to be very transparent and open about this to see this is what we think, what we can expect. There is this 2-year vision that we have, but let's first focus on this one. Here we already reduce opportunity cost by XYZ%. Here we kind of get some small sales. It's not going to be huge. It's not going to be paid for the project, but then we get some feedback from the customers, but we already generate returns. Now we say we scale it to the other market, to an adjacent market. We can actually test if it also works for other markets, and we get XY returns. So doing this in bits and pieces does two things. One is you actually generate not only results in the first business year, but actually already on short notice, which is super brilliant. Even if it's small things, it gives confidence, right? In you, in the project team, but also in what you're doing. And the second one is that you really also learn on building something up in phases and also allow it to still go into a certain direction. Because often we are very stiff to sell this big project and then to say it needs to be this and that. And that way from my experience, the buy-in is more realistic to get anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as our friend Chris Baltuznik said it at Elevate just a few weeks ago, make a friend on the finance team because you want to make sure that the numbers and the financial projections are your friends and your allies, but also that taking this iterative approach to everything you're doing, including the financial projections, is going to make it a lot easier to sell the business case across the organization.
And
I just
one more thing to add, maybe you also need to look into multiple KPIs, right? So again, not only return on investment, but also as mentioned is in the white paper, opportunity costs, cost of stagnation, right? All these things should be in there to make from multiple angles to get a view from multiple angles, not only return on investment, because in the end, it's still a proof of concept, right? So if you have multiple things that you can measure and actually measure against, right, then the more secure a CFO feels as well.
I'm glad you brought up, how the CFO feels and, this feeling of security, because one of the last things I actually wanted to touch on was mitigating risk, right? So there's always a chance of risk with any digital transformation, any change project, no matter how big or small. And there are so many risks to consider in some enterprises, depending on the industry or, specific regulations. There are entire teams that are dedicated to risk management alongside compliance. So how would you suggest actually presenting risk and risk mitigation within the business case to make the CFO feel secure, to make other executives feel a bit more secure?
Yeah, like we put it in the white paper, as you can see here, that this is something that it's It's quite what means an easy assessment. I would recommend to always do this also in a group, to not be dependent on individual opinions and maybe even have stakeholders in there to say, we looked at it together, but to look at the likelihood of a risk to take place. Also there, it could be a super nice combination with scenario planning. So start first with scenario planning, say, okay, what if it works this way? What are the indicators in the market that we need to look into to, actually see what scenario we are going into? And then also what's the impact? And it can be super easy exercise. It can also be very elaborate exercise. I would start with something like this to really say, okay, let's put it here. But down the road, for example, how we do this, we do a very extensive risk impact analysis and calculate based on a weighting also of these aspects of the organization. What are the things that really you should pursue and which ones you should probably stop or park? And another one is to look at risk maybe from two different angles, right? Risk, I think the biggest risk are those that you don't know. And if you have a risk, you can start to develop mitigating strategies. So if something now is here in, let's say, a medium risk, but you think it's a super nice idea, can I do anything to mitigate the risk to actually reduce this to a low likelihood? And then it becomes interesting because then you start looking into small projects. Then you start transforming your organization. And I think that is a super nice starting point, starting from scenarios that have an impact also on the C level, break it down to the risk impact analysis, and then break it down to actions.
And I love one of the things you said here, which is to involve your stakeholders closely, because you're right. Like, you sometimes don't know what you don't know. And so if you're involving a group of stakeholders and you have a minimum viable team, you can truly begin to understand some of these unknown risks as well as what's needed to mitigate them. And I think the other thing here is to also revisit this periodically, right? So it's not just an iterative approach to making a business case, but it's also an iterative approach to mitigating risks, because what the risks are and how you handle them might also change with changing market conditions. So the risks that we might see for our business today, might not be the same risks in 6 years. So I think this iterative approach is really applicable to all kinds of change management and transformation. Well, with that, I think we are almost at time for today. So if you'd like to keep the conversation going, definitely feel free to connect with us directly on LinkedIn. We know we didn't have a lot of time today, but definitely feel free to submit your questions, and we'll be more than happy to get back to you. If you haven't read the white paper yet, but you liked what we talked about today, here's another QR code to download it. And additionally, we actually have a special offer today from Martin and his team at 10ops. Martin, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the quick scan?
Yeah, a quick scan that we offer is basically an outside-in view on your organization, but also on your opportunities, to really have an objective view on, is there really meat on the bone, based on evidence, based on patterns, research papers, whatever. So really evidence-driven, to do a bit of a sanity check and an outside-in view on these kind of things. So yeah, if you're interested or have any questions, reach out on LinkedIn or just follow the QR code, and more than happy to engage.
Awesome. Well, Martin, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your expertise with us. It's always an interesting and insightful conversation with you. To everyone in our audience, if you're ready to be a champion for change and to start your digital transformation journey, we're all here to support you. You can contact our team of commerce experts to discuss your business goals. You can take advantage of our free 60-day trial, Composable Commerce for B2B, or you can obviously contact 10ops to help assess your current strategy. On behalf of all the teams at commercetools and 10ops, we would like to thank you all for your time and attention today, and we wish you the most seamless and successful digital transformation journeys. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.